Thank you for your participation in this series. Thank you for the teenagers for coming and joining us and gaining what you can. We got an email today from Dorothy's daughter who lives in Oklahoma, and she wanted information, thought it might be beneficial in their congregation to do a similar study down there. So I sent her the information about the books we've used and told her how to get to the link where you can download everything that we've done and have access to all of that. Everything we've talked about in the previous 15 studies are absolutely worthless without tonight's study. Without what we're going to look at tonight, you can do all you want with what we've talked about the first 15 times, and you really haven't accomplished anything. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? What does it profit if you raise a healthy, well-adjusted child who doesn't know God? And so, without tonight's lesson, the previous 15 lessons are academic. The question is, who is going to provide the ethical and moral standards for our children? That's not just a theoretical question or some kind of rhetorical question. It's a serious question. What's the answer?
The parents.
Well, the parents is one answer. That's the hopeful answer. And listening to what Steve had to share, if you don't teach your children about sex, I don't guess they'll hear it anywhere, will they?
From their friends.
They're going to hear something somewhere. They're going to learn something somewhere. And if you do not give your children ethical and moral standards, they will obtain some somewhere or attain none anywhere. But unless you give your children the ethical and moral standards, then their life is going to be more difficult. And so we all need to take that responsibility of providing ethical and moral standards with our children, with our grandchildren, with children at church. The Bible class teachers instill a lot of these in at least the knowledge part of it in their children. Whether children find what they need from their parents depends on two things. The first thing is whether their parents have it themselves. If you don't have it, you can't give it to your children. The children will not find what they need from you if you do not have it in the first place. And even that is of little value if they do not identify with you enough to accept and incorporate your values into their own lives. You may have it, but if they don't relate to you, connect to you enough to value your values, then it's not going to benefit them at all. Whether the children find what they need from their parents depends on whether their parents have it themselves. The most valuable treasure that a parent can pass on to their children is a foundation upon which to base their lives. I went to a website for psychotherapists, and they listed some advice about moral knowledge for children. These are the 4 things they listed. Moral knowledge starts with rules of appropriate behavior and develops over time into a deeper understanding of basic ethical principles. And so it starts with rules of appropriate behavior and then develops into a deeper understanding. Isn't that what we talk about all the time here? About rules of appropriate behavior that over time develop into ethical principles. Don't we try to stress that? Number 2, impulse control refers to the ability to refrain from unacceptable behavior, not an absence of impulses. We cannot eliminate certain things from our lives. It's how we deal with them. We've mentioned before that peace is not an absence of trouble. It is knowing how to deal with problems when they arise. The third one is inner guidance is the capacity to take moral responsibility, repair interpersonal rifts, and do good for its own sake, not for reward or avoidance of punishment. Why do we do what we do as Christians? Do we do what we do as Christians to earn a place in heaven? No. Do we do what we do as Christians to avoid a place in hell? No. We do what we do as Christians because it's the right thing to do. It's what God wants us to do. We're serving God. And then the fourth one was empathy and compassion encompasses the transcendent level of moral awareness that takes us beyond the self, leading us away from callousness, cruelty, or using others for our own gain. Isn't it important for a Christian to get beyond themselves and think of others, to get beyond the selfish and put other people first? And so the most valuable treasure that a parent can pass on to children is that foundation upon which to build their lives. And the author of the book lists, first of all, mentions that treasure is God. The foundation, the treasure that's the foundation to build their lives on is God. If whatever you build is not built on God, then you're on a bad foundation. And he listed some things that I thought were interesting. God is strength in times of conflict. And again, a Christian is not promised a life free of conflict at all. In fact, we're promised maybe more conflict. But a Christian is promised that there will be somebody with us when that happens, and that God is strength in times of conflict. The treasure is knowing that God is comfort in times of distress. You've probably experienced, and we've mentioned before, that in a workplace where people are always going out and drinking and running around, when the chips are down, who do they turn to? Their co-worker who doesn't do that. Their co-worker who seems to have a solid moral compass. And that co-worker has that because they've learned to look to God. And so people look to, hopefully to you in times of distress, because they know that you have looked to God in times of distress. God is wisdom in times of confusion. I guess it's common throughout the ages, but it seems like there's a lot of confusion in the world today. We live in a pretty confused world. And the only source of wisdom in a confused world is God and His instruction. So God is strength in times of conflict, comfort in times of distress, wisdom in times of confusion. God is strength in times of conflict. Did I already say that? He gives correction in times of error. You know, God does not accept everything. He does not say everything is okay. He doesn't say you just do whatever you want to and that's going to be fine. If there is error, He corrects it. But more and more I'm thinking that those of us in the Lord's church who believe in such a thing as truth, that we need to stand up for the truth and teach the truth and preach the truth, that can only be done efficiently in an atmosphere that Jason was talking about Sunday where it's safe. I think we can only take a firm stand for truth if people feel safe. And more I see the wisdom of that. I think that God gives correction in times of error, but in a certain setting. He provides help in times past. He provides help in times present. And He promises even more for the future. I don't know of anybody who has more reason to be optimistic about the future than a Christian. Doesn't matter whether the stock market goes up or down or sideways. It doesn't matter whether we have a pandemic or what happens. Christians are optimistic about the future. You can even lose all your cattle. You can not get one good birth out of your whole cattle this session. But Christians are still optimistic about the future because they're looking at something different. They're not looking at things that other people look at. God gives guidance and direction all the time. He's always there to guide us and direct us. And God does not send us out alone. We really need to understand that we're not alone, that we're in this together, that we are a family, and that no matter what is happening, that we can all rely on each other and rally around each other and lift each other up. He goes on to say he gives directions to be carried out, but gives amazingly wonderful promises to those who are willing to obey. He allows loss and pain at times, but he always heals and replaces the loss with something better. He does not force himself upon us, but patiently waits to be accepted. He does not coerce us into doing his will, but is deeply distressed and hurt when we follow the wrong path. He wants us to love him because he first loved us, but he gave us a free will to choose him or reject him. He wants to take care of us, but refuses to force himself upon us. His greatest desire is to be our Father, but he will not intrude. If we want what he wants, a loving, caring father-child relationship with him, we must accept his offer. He is too considerate to force it. He is waiting for you and me to open our lives to him and become his children. And of course, as you have guessed, he must be a personal God. The personal, intimate relationship with God through Jesus is the most important thing in life. And if you're going to pass anything on to your child or your children, this is it. It's a personal, intimate relationship with God through Jesus. And so children are going to find what they're looking for in their parents only if their parents have it to start with. And they're also going to only do that if they trust their parents, accept their parents enough to incorporate their parents' values. I think you would agree that children remember feelings more readily than facts. They will remember something that happened to them many, many years ago. They'll forget the facts, but they'll remember things that they experience in their lives. And the same thing is true as they relate with you. They're going to remember experiences, maybe your experiences, than the facts that you tried to teach them. Here's a popular misconception, and you've probably heard it. I want my child to learn to make his own decisions after he is exposed to everything. You ever heard that before? Doesn't that make sense? You know, you find out that you don't step out in the street by getting run over by a truck. You find out that a stove burns by putting your hand on the burner.
How do you expose a child to everything?
That's an excellent question. In this sense, you don't want to. You don't want them to learn about drugs by experiencing drugs. You don't want them to learn about sexual immorality or alcoholism or any of those things by having them experience them. And so,
And then at what age do you, like when you decide to sit down with, oh, here's your first shot of whiskey, and how old would they be when
yeah,
you did that?
yeah. Give them a drink so they can be exposed to everything. And so, obviously, this doesn't make any sense. We will see in a minute, though, that they can benefit from experience, but it doesn't have to be their own. If you share your lives with them, they can benefit from your experiences without having to go through it themselves. Without continued guidance and clarification in ethical, moral, and spiritual matters, the child will become increasingly confused about the world, especially if the world is teaching something different. You have to stick with it. You have to continue to guide them, continue to clarify, continue to lead them. They will be bombarded by a whole bunch of stuff, and a good part of it won't be worth anything.
I think, at least for me, I can remember really
And that's one of the things that children struggle with. They want that, but if they don't have it, then they're lost, and they're just kind of floating around. One of the finest gifts you can give to a child is a clear, basic understanding of the world and its confusing problems. You're not sheltering them from the problems, but you give them a clear picture, a clear understanding of what's going on in the world and why. Every child loves a story. Maybe every adult loves a story too. Everybody loves a story. And so use that. Bedtime. Read Bible stories to your children at bedtime. I cannot stress too much the importance of just having a good Bible storybook, and read a story to your children as they're at bedtime. If you will read a Bible story to your children and pray with your children at bedtime, it'll really go a long way. And it seems so simple. I mean, we're not talking rocket science here. It's just read a story out of a Bible storybook and pray with them. But every child loves a story. And bedtime is a good time to do that. Parents must teach your children spiritual facts, but if that's all they get, then they're not going to do anything with them. They need to see how to apply them in everyday life, and probably see more than hear how to apply them in everyday life. Now, you can't apply something if you don't have it, and so you can't start applying something if you don't know what it is. We have to have a foundation of knowledge that comes from facts, from the Bible. But the children have to see how to apply those in everyday life. And if you shield your children from what's going on in your life, they're not going to see that. Share your spiritual life with your children. And give your child the experience of walking with God daily and relying on Him personally. And again, they'll only see that in your life. You can't tell them this. You can't impart this knowledge to them. They're going to get it by seeing you doing this, by seeing you walk with God daily and relying on Him personally. Experience is the best teacher, but let your child share in yours. They don't have to experience it themselves. You have to use some wisdom. There are some things in your life you probably won't involve them in. But let your child see that the solution to financial problems is relying on God. The answer to personal problems is relying on God. That the answer to any challenge in your life, anything that you face, is God. On the other hand, help them see that all the blessings come from God. All the blessings that we have come from God. And so as you experience these things in your life, be sure you're not sharing them with your children, so that they can see God in your life and see your experiences. And very important, teach a child by example. That should be how to forgive, not now to give. Forgive. It looks like an H, but it's an N. It looks like an M, but it's an H. Teach them how to forgive and how to find forgiveness, and you do that by example. Teach them how to find forgiveness from God. Teach them how to find forgiveness from other people. And maybe teach them how to find forgiveness from themselves. Sometimes that's the hardest thing, is to learn how to forgive ourselves. And so by your example, by what you do and how you deal with things, teach them how to forgive other people, but also how to be forgiven, so that they don't carry that that guilt around with them. And then one more thing. Everything we've said tonight was worthless without one more thing, and that is prayer. If everything you do is not preceded by prayer and wrapped up in prayer, then you're relying on your own ability. And so pray and pray and pray and pray. I started praying for our grandchildren's spouses when they were born. And you should be praying for your children from the time they're born, not only your children, but your children's spouses, that God will be raising up spouses that will help them in their walk with God, that they'll keep them on the right path. And there's no such thing as too much prayer. And I promise you, you cannot do it. You're not capable of doing all these things we've been talking about without God's help and guidance. And so we're going backward. We're starting where we should start, and that's prayer, and then spiritual. But it's good to end up that way, that pray and pray and pray and share your spiritual life with your children. In just a minute, we'll break up into our groups and talk about helping our children develop spiritually. Next Wednesday night, Lord willing, we'll continue the same format, but we'll start a new topic. The teenagers will go back to their teenage classes, but we're going to start looking at applying the fruit of the Spirit to our lives. And again, you have to have the knowledge before you can apply something, but the knowledge without the application is of little value. And so there are some study guides for next week's lesson in the information center back there. It's going to take 2 weeks, I think, to cover love. And so the first week, next week, we'll look at 1 Corinthians 13, what we can learn about love from 1 Corinthians 13. And then the next week, Lord willing, Romans 12 and some other passages to help us see. But the study guides are there. There are several other passages listed. If you have time, look at those other passages, see how they contribute to it. But the main thing to be thinking about is not just the academics of it, but how can you develop these traits in your life? What can we do to grow in the fruit of the Spirit? And this next time it would be love. And so we'll keep the same format. We'll come in for the first part of the study to talk about the passages and so forth. We'll break up into our groups and talk about how we can do it. How can we apply this in our lives? It's a little bit hard to do in a larger group, figure out how we can do it in our lives, and so we'll do that in the smaller groups. What thoughts do you have? What questions, comments? Okie dokie. Thank you very much.